Hello, I'm Montse Alvarado, and this is EWTN News In Depth.
Viva el Papa! Viva el Papa! Viva el Papa! Viva el Papa!
Pope Francis embarks on a history-making trip to the Middle East. In war-torn Iraq, he calls for cooperation among religious and ethnic groups and to end religious violence. His visit sparks cheers and celebration.
You can't imagine the joy. And once he entered, everyone was really thrilled with joy.
A first-hand account from the scene as the faithful react to the Pope's visit, plus expert analysis on the impact of this historic papal pilgrimage. Caught on tape, this video goes viral as a nun in Myanmar begs riot police to spare the children and take her instead. The country in chaos after a military coup overthrows its democratic leader. A challenge to landmark religious freedom legislation, a deep dive into the threats posed by the Equality Act.
Well, everybody needs a little Jesus in their life.
And this week's faith journey. We'll tell you about a man who shares his message of Jesus at every stop. EWTN News In Depth is next. A joyous ending to a historic papal journey. Pope Francis celebrates Mass with Iraqi Catholics. His mission of peace, offering hope and inspiration to a people whose faith has been challenged by decades of war and religious persecution. Welcome to EWTN News In Depth. The Holy Father has returned safely home after a Vatican trip decades in the planning. Despite COVID concerns and an uptick in deadly bombings, the Pope was determined to go through with his visit to Iraq. An EWTN News crew traveled with Pope Francis on his pilgrimage of peace. Here's Vatican Bureau reporter Colin Flynn.
"I come as a pilgrim" were the words that would set the tone for this incredible 3.5-day visit to the nation of Iraq. Pope Francis setting out on a mission to try and heal the wounds of war, bridge centuries-old divisions, and bring comfort to the suffering.
Now, the rockets hit this morning around 7 a.m.
With recent suicide bombings and rocket attacks, the Iraqi army and secret service took no chances on this trip, and security was tight. One Iraqi man I spoke to said he had not seen so much military since the war. At the presidential palace, the Holy Father meets President Barham Salih. These Iraqi children present the Pope with flowers in the colours of Vatican City. But it was far from the elegance and splendour of the palace that Pope Francis was to have the most important meeting of his trip. For it was down this dilapidated alleyway in the holy city of Najaf that Iraq's most revered Shia cleric welcomed the pontiff into his home. The Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani is seen as the spiritual leader of Iraqi Shia community, and behind closed doors, away from the world's press and TV cameras, the two talked for 45 minutes. After it was revealed, the Grand Ayatollah said that he believed Christians should be able to live in peace, and they should also have the same rights as all other citizens. His statements were breaking news across the Arab world.
रोमन कैथोलिक चर्च के सरबराह पॉप फ्रांसिस की आयतुल्लाह उज़्मा सैयद अली सिस्तानी से मुलाकात.
Later that day, Pope Francis flies by helicopter to the Nineveh Plains, the birthplace of Abraham, father of the three main monotheistic religions. Ali Ella Kildali is with the local Christian community.
When Mr. Pope Francis is coming, he sent to the world about peace.
In the presence of Christians, Muslims, and other religious groups, Pope Francis says, "We seem to have returned home." Dr. Hamad is a spokesperson for the Sunni community, and he's part of the delegation organised to welcome Pope Francis.
Papa Francis, welcome to Iraq, where you give the message of peace.
At the St. Joseph's Chaldean Church in Baghdad, the Pope celebrates Mass in the Chaldean Rite, the first time a pontiff has ever done so. It sends out a message to the Iraqi people. You are part of the global church. Due to the pandemic and security restrictions, most Iraqi Christians pray with the Holy Father from inside their homes, like 89-year-old Bashar al-Kasrofal with her granddaughter, and also the Al-Shana family in Iraqi Kurdistan. In his sermon at St. Joseph's Cathedral, Pope Francis says that love is our strength and reminds the Iraqi people once again, we are all brothers and sisters. On the Pope's final day, the most dangerous part of his journey, as he visits the city of Mosul, where ISIS first took root, the same terrorist group who once threatened to behead him. Now he stands in the middle of the rubble and ruins left after the war and says, hope is more powerful than hatred, and peace is more powerful than war. These words echo through the devastated city, bringing hope to those who hear it, like 26-year-old Rajid, who was 16 when she and her family had to flee.
It's a big thing that when you like remember the bad days, and now in that time we couldn't imagine even that we're gonna be here again and we're gonna celebrate like Pope's coming. It's a huge happiness.
The Holy Father brings his historic trip to Iraq to a close by celebrating Mass with 10,000 people at a stadium in the city of Erbil. But with a recent spike in COVID-19, there is criticism of the large gathering, something the Pope is challenged about on the papal flight home.
The people who came to see you could also get sick or even die.
The Pope says he thought about it long and hard and prayed about it, and on balance, he thought it was worth the risk. And for the people here, that risk is certainly worth taking. You can feel the joy and happiness from the crowd, their pride at hosting the Holy Father in their country. In his sermon, Pope Francis said that he saw firsthand during this journey that the church in Iraq is alive and that Christ is alive and at work with his holy and faithful people. In Baghdad, Iraq, Colm Flynn, EWTN News In Depth.
The Archbishop of Erbil, Iraq, was one of the clergy who was with Pope Francis during his many stops across the country. He spoke to EWTN News In Depth earlier this week, sharing his reflections after the whirlwind trip. Here's Archbishop Bashar Warda on the record. Your Grace, thank you so much for being on the show with us to talk about the Pope's momentous trip to Iraq.
Thank you.
We're coming off of what is being billed as the most significant trip of Pope Francis's papacy. For you, what was the most memorable moment?
Well, the Mass, of course, the final Mass was the joyful celebration. First of all, I mean, people were waiting. I mean, they've started coming to the stadium from 11 o'clock. And when they came, they immediately, they took their seats, but they started really singing and tried to dance to prepare. There was a time when we were praying the rosary, but then come back again to sing, and some of them were dancing on the field. But when His Holiness came from Mosul and ended up playing late, 1 hour. In fact, God bless him, he did not have any time for rest. He had his lunch quickly and then made it to the car. The protocol told us that he will not be able to do the Papamobile round inside the stadium. Everyone was really sad, and I myself was praying, my God, just help him to make it, because all what the people would like to really see first is to welcome him. It's to welcome him. That was really important. He arrived to the stadium. We were at the backside, and he said, yeah, I'm going to prepare the car. And you can't imagine the joy. And once he entered, everyone was really, really thrilled with joy. The mass, I mean, it's not just for me, for all the people also who watch the mass. They've said this is something, a celebration from heaven.
In his homily during the Chaldean Rite Mass that he celebrated in the cathedral in Baghdad, he focused on wisdom, witness, and promises, a reflection on the words of the Apostle Paul and the wisdom of Jesus that calls for Christian witness of love. Why was this an important message to the church in Iraq?
Well, personally, I would say first, Baghdad is what we call the center for political decision maker, and most of the people also who were there also in the church were the president and some of the high officials, personals. So yes, everyone, they do need to hear that message. And for us also, this as a church leaders, but we always have to ask for wisdom to really make the right path towards witnessing to our Christian values, Christian vocation. So everyone needs to hear that message.
Pope Francis visited various sites where ISIS had threatened to behead him. Were there security concerns on this trip associated with these specific locations?
No, not at all. I think everyone was quite comfortable, and he wanted the whole world to see that the city needs that fraternity, the solidarity that's needed to be rebuilt, to show that kindness and love and generosity, peace will have the final word.
The meeting with Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani has come under question by some critics. I know that this was a momentous occasion as well. Pope Francis explained to journalists on Monday that his goal was to promote interreligious dialogue in an effort to mend Catholic-Muslim relations in keeping with Vatican II teaching. Was this historic first meeting of a pope with a Shiite leader necessary?
When he mentioned interreligious dialogue, His Holiness is setting an example of a real, authentic dialogue, not to sit around the table for others to come to discuss and do the dialogue. No. I will leave my place in Rome and go to the other who is different and make the dialogue. Dialogue needs also physical approach to the others. It's not about writing and exchanging ideas on papers. No. It needs someone to move and to leave his position where he is and his ideas, his thoughts, his perception, and go to the others. Once this step's been taken, you can't imagine the response, because you are leaving yourself at the disposal of the others. That's what God did also when he became and was one of us. He took flesh and yes, the response could be people would accept him or people would refuse him. Ayatollah said that over the last 10 years he haven't received anyone. So that model is needed.
You're known for placing special responsibilities for helping Christians on the United States because of Iraq's non-Muslim minorities who are victims of the last regime change when the U.S. invaded. What are your comments on what the Biden administration could do with this?
I think the last 2 years we've seen that the American government are responding positively on this by...
That was under the Trump administration, the special emphasis that was placed on rebuilding the Nineveh Plains? Much from the Knights of Columbus.
Yeah, but following the Knights of Columbus efforts, also the U.S. aid now have put a lot of money in rebuilding Nineveh Plain, not just for Christians, but all of the Nineveh Plain, that I would hope that the U.S. aid would continue the efforts in putting some of the funds in rebuilding the Nineveh Plain, and also making the efforts and continuing also working with partners like churches and also some of the Yazidi shrines, some of the Yazidi NGOs who could be also of help. I mean, the help start to come, and I hope with the Biden administration, and I'm sure they will see it positively, that these help is making some of the positive impact in changing the life of the people, and really also rebuilding the infrastructure which is being destroyed.
Let's talk about then rebuilding things that have been destroyed. There's a Marian statue that was desecrated from the ISIS occupation. It's been restored and it was blessed by Pope Francis, but they specifically left her hands broken. What does that message send to the faithful?
It's been, I mean, yes, despite the suffering, despite the torture, life is still there. Where is ISIS now in Karamles? No, only the sons and daughters of Mary are there. Despite all of this suffering, despite the wounds which is being seen in her body, but still life is there. That's always the message. Our Lord, risen Lord. Also, the wounds are in His hands, but He's the victorious. He's risen.
Thank you so much for this interview. I really appreciate you coming on the show and telling us about this momentous trip.
Thank you. God bless you.
What did the rest of the world think about the Pope's visit to Iraq? Our expert panel has analysis next. But first, there were so many fantastic images from the Pope's trip, we just had to share. Here's our Pope photo album, day 1. Arrival in Baghdad. Official welcome from the Iraqi Prime Minister, President, civil leaders, and diplomats. Meeting with bishops, priests, and religious at Baghdad's Cathedral of Our Lady of Salvation, site of a Christian slaughter just 11 years ago. Welcome back to EWTN News In Depth. I'm Montse Alvarado. We continue our coverage of Pope Francis's historic trip to Iraq, a trip that was years in the making and will be talked about for years to come. Joining us to give us their take and the spiritual and political impact of the Pope's trip are Catherine Lopez, Senior Fellow at National Review Institute, Ambassador Alberto Fernandez, Vice President of the Middle East Media Research Institute, and Dr. Matthew Bunson, EWTN Executive Editor and Washington Bureau Chief. Thank you for joining us. Catherine, you've bemoaned the lack of coverage of this trip and the coronavirus veil that is being used as a filter to avoid the deeper discussion on the magnitude of this journey. Why is it so momentous?
Oh my goodness, it's nothing short of a miracle, Monsi, that this trip happened, because as you alluded to, so many people were trying to stop it, using coronavirus as the reason, some prudently perhaps, but the Pope said, this is important. I have to go to my people. And this is the Pope who always talks about going to the peripheries, and there he did. Went into a war zone, essentially. There are rockets being fired at the airport in Erbil a week before he went there, and he went anyway. Erbil is where the closing mass was, which was the most beautiful part of the trip for me, looking in as an American, knowing that Archbishop Warda, who you just talked to, is such a remarkable, courageous man who took in all of these people from Mosul who had to leave when the ISIS genocide basically told them they had to convert or die. So they fled, and he welcomed them. And Monty, he opened a Catholic university in the midst of the genocide. I mean, it's nothing short of remarkable what he's done. And so to see the Holy Father there, a Pope has never been there, to say you are not forgotten to these people who have been forgotten, frankly. And I think, particularly as Americans, I'm so grateful to you, Monty, for covering this as much as you are. First of all, because I only know the Iraqi Christians because of the man who created the show, Andrew Walther, who used to work for the Knights Knights of Columbus, and as you said in your interview with Archbishop Warda, they have been such a godsend, the Knights of Columbus, to the people of Iraq, to the Christians in Erbil in a particular way, and they serve the Yazidis and Muslims as well. But this Christian population there is dwindling, and the Pope had to go there now because that's the last chance for them.
Exactly.
The hourglass is near empty.
It is. Alberto, give us context for that. What is next for Iraq and all of these minorities and its relations with the region?
Well, of course, that's the big question. Certainly, it was a wonderful visit and encouraging not just Christians, but I think all of Iraq's many religious minorities, the Yazidis and others, that there's still hope, that they're not forgotten in the world, that there's a reason to hang on, there's a reason to build, to try to stay in their homeland. So that's extremely positive. Unfortunately, that's, there's a larger context, which is kind of the larger political struggle inside Iraq and inside the region, which doesn't involve Christians, but Christians are affected by it. Yazidis are affected by it, right? And that's, of course, the extremists on both sides, the ISIS types extremists and the pro-Iranian militias, which have tremendous power inside Iraq. Not surprisingly, both of those who are arch enemies. ISIS today issued an op-ed criticizing the Holy Father's visit. And the Shia militias, who are arch enemies of ISIS, also criticized the visit. Both of them are very hostile to it. And Iraqi Muslims, though, very interestingly, were very positive about the visit, not just Christians. And in fact, they had a little fun with it. They didn't mock the Holy Father, they mocked Iraqi politicians. And they joked, they said, "We wish the Holy Father would come every week because we're seeing our roads paved and our cities cleaned and greater security. So we welcome him that he come more frequently."
Matthew, let's riff on that a little bit. Why have so many people called this papal visit a pilgrimage? What do pilgrims go to Nineveh, and the various places that the Pope visited that were just described in a political context? What does it mean pastorally?
Well, when Pope Francis went to the traditional birthplace of Abraham, he made an important point. He said this is essentially like coming home. Here we have in the birthplace of the Abrahamic religions. We have the ancient roots that bring together Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Any papal journey is a kind of pilgrimage. It's a spiritual journey. But for Pope Francis, this had deep significance for him as a pilgrim of peace, but he was also essentially completing a journey that had been the desire of Pope St. John Paul II all the way back in 2000. He wanted to go to that very spot, but was prevented by the instability of the region, of course, the presence of the dictatorship of Saddam Hussein. So this is a spiritual journey as well for all of the Iraqi people, a reminder to them of the ancientness of that community. And in a different world, and the Nineveh Plain would be great places of pilgrimage for Christians everywhere, and we have to keep praying that the day will come when that is actually possible.
Catherine, why then was this Chaldean Rite Catholic Mass, the first ever celebrated by a pope, so significant?
Oh my goodness, so significant, in part because the Chaldean Mass, part of it is in Aramaic, and the Pope himself began the Our Father in Aramaic, and that's the language Jesus spoke. So beautiful, so powerful. And I'll say one quick thing about this that has never been told before on EWTN. There's a very close connection to us and public policy when the Knights of Columbus were urging the Obama administration to recognize the genocide of the Christians and Yazidis in Iraq. The weekend before, on St. Patrick's Day, John Kerry announced the genocide. There was a little private Chaldean Mass at the Catholic Information Center that Father Douglas Bozzi celebrated. And to this day, I consider that the St. Patrick's Day miracle. And because we had that Mass in the beautiful words of the Our Father in Aramaic, right at the closest tabernacle to the White House. And he likewise, in Erbil, he celebrated our regular Roman rite, but he began the creed in Arabic. Most Americans don't even realize there are any Christians in Iraq, in that area, the cradle of civilization and Christianity. So to hear the Holy Father speak in Aramaic and Arabic is just so momentous.
And it's historic. Talking about these ancient civilizations, Alberto, you mentioned on Twitter that there weren't any Iraqi Jews at the Interfaith meeting at Can you give us some more context on why this was criticized? Pope Francis did send greetings to President Ruvi of Israel. Why is it important to remember this once thriving Jewish population?
Well, it's a very good question. It's people have a lot of ignorance about Eastern Christians. They also have a lot of ignorance about Eastern Jews. And people don't know, for example, that 80 years ago, the city of Baghdad was about half Jewish. And the people were ethnically cleansed beginning in 1941 and had to flee the country. Unfortunately, of course, anything related to Israel or even Jewish people in Iraq immediately becomes part of the very, very, polarized political process of pro-Iranian elements using it to beat up on the government. But certainly the Iraqi Jewish community, just like the Iraqi Christian community, have historically been an integral part of the country. The Jews are gone from Iraq, and we hope that with this visit, the Christians of Iraq can hang on and flourish.
Amid rumors, Matthew, that this was the last trip for Pope Francis, Francis has said he will be in Budapest for the Eucharistic Congress this September. Can you weigh in?
Yeah, there were rumors coming out of this, and all of us saw the images of Pope Francis as he seemed to struggle. That the shot, for example, of his walking down that alley to visit the Grand Ayatollah al-Sistani, the limp that he has, the obvious pain that he's in. But Pope Francis is determined to continue. For the Pope, who said that he was reluctant to take any sort of long trips as Pope, he has become a pretty remarkable traveler, despite somebody in his 80s. And we look forward, I think, to Pope Francis continuing these apostolic journeys, especially because we've just seen in Iraq, he views these as such an important part, not just of his pontificate, but of bringing the world together in the wake of the pandemic, but also in the wake of the economic fallout from it.
Alberto, we asked Archbishop Warda about the statue of Mary he blessed in Erbil. Do you know the backstory there?
I don't know, except that I know that it was one of many precious symbols damaged and desecrated by ISIS in 2014, 2015. The remarkable thing is how much has been restored since then.
Catherine, Ambassador Fernandez, and Dr. Bunson, thank you so much for bringing us these important insights. Continuing our look at the Catholic Church around the world, incredible images of a Catholic nun in Myanmar have gained international attention for her bravery. Sister Anne Rose Nhu Tang of the Sisters of St. Francis Xavier fell to her knees, begging military forces not to shoot or hurt protesters. Widespread protests sparked after a military coup, and the 45-year-old says she told police to shoot her instead. Sister Anne Rose says soon after she heard gunshots, she saw a river of blood in the streets. She tried to bring some victims to a clinic she runs, but wound up being blinded by tear gas. At least 60 people have died in the pro-democracy protests. More headlines ahead as we look at this week in review. And now back to our Pope photo album, day 2 of the Holy Father's Iraq journey. Meeting Iraq's Shiite spiritual leader, Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani. Interfaith meeting on the ancient plain of biblical birthplace of the patriarch Abraham. Celebration of Mass at the Chaldean Cathedral in Baghdad, the first time in history a pope has presided over a Mass in Iraq. There's major news to report in our Week in Review. Exactly 1 year ago this week, the World Health Organization declared the coronavirus a global pandemic, and America went into lockdown. The United States continues to lead the world in the number of COVID deaths. As we record this program, that figure stands at 530,000 people. Globally, more than 2,600,000 people have lost their battle with COVID-19. That fast-growing number is equivalent to wiping out the entire population of Chicago. Marking the one-year anniversary, President Joe Biden gave his first primetime address to the nation. He said despite the toll the pandemic has taken on America, efforts to vaccinate the country are gaining momentum. Vaccine manufacturers have ramped up, and more vaccination centers, pharmacies, pop-up clinics, and mobile vehicles are coming online.
All adult Americans will be eligible to get a vaccine no later than May 1. That's much earlier than expected. Let me be clear. That doesn't mean everyone's going to have that shot immediately, but it means you'll be able to get in line beginning May 1. If we do all this, if we do our part, if we do this together, by July the 4th, there's a good chance you, your families and friends will be able to get together in your backyard or in your neighborhood and have a cookout or a barbecue and celebrate Independence Day.
The president's speech came on the same day that he signed the massive $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill, the largest spending bill in American history. The package is being praised by Democrats for the expansion of social safety nets, including more than $6 billion for food security-related programs, more than $25 billion in emergency rental assistance, and extensions of already expanded unemployment payments through September. The legislation also provides families with up to $3,600 for each child in child tax credits. The bill did not receive any votes from Republicans, who say the package is too broad.
This isn't about the virus. As you know, less than 9% is used to defeat the virus. It doesn't prioritize school openings. Most of the money for schools doesn't even go out till 2023. It pays people more to stay home than go back to work.
We promised to put vaccination shots in arms for every single American. Mission accomplished. We promised to put money in the pockets of everyday Americans who've been struggling through the economic trauma of the pandemic. Mission accomplished.
The White House says the first round of stimulus checks could hit direct deposit accounts as soon as this weekend. Meantime, leading U.S. bishops are calling the lack of restrictions on abortion funding in the bill unconscionable. The head of the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops, Archbishop Jose Gomez, issued a joint statement saying, in part, the many important life-saving provisions in the American Rescue Plan Act have been undermined because it facilitates and funds the destruction of life. The bill provides funding for state and local governments, community health centers, and the Title X Family Planning Program, which could fund abortions and abortion providers. The Senate has confirmed Merrick Garland as our nation's next Attorney General in a 70-30 vote. On his first day at the Department of Justice, the veteran judge addressed his more than 150,000 employees virtually, saying that they were united by their commitment to the rule of law and seeking equal justice under the law. The 68-year-old has pledged that prosecuting the insurrectionists who stormed the U.S. Capitol on January 6th will be a top priority. The new Attorney General will also decide whether the Justice Department will investigate former President Trump's role in the Capitol riots and how to handle a federal investigation over the business affairs of President Biden's son, Hunter. And President Biden's nominee for Health and Human Services Secretary, California Attorney General Xavier Becerra, advanced in the Senate this week. Becerra faces criticism over his record supporting abortion and doctor-assisted suicide. In February, several senators and dozens of House members requested President Biden rescind the nomination for Becerra's defense of California mandates that force pro-life centers to advertise for abortion. A bill that would amend landmark civil rights legislation is currently under consideration in Congress. For many Catholics, the Equality Act is cause for alarm. Reporter Kate Scanlon explains.
What it really is damaging to are the rights of women to have protected, safe spaces.
I think a lot of the consequences of this legislation really haven't been examined in detail.
Congress is considering a bill that would amend federal law, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964, to broaden the definition of sex discrimination. If passed, the Equality Act would redefine the term to include sexual orientation and gender identity as protected characteristics. This would apply in areas including employment, housing, government funding, and education. It changes the definition of public spaces to any entity that produces goods, services, or programs, including small businesses and charities. Supporters of the bill say it prohibits discrimination.
It takes a momentous step towards full equality that brings our nation closer to the founding promise of liberty and justice for all, enshrined in the preamble of our Constitution by our founders.
Opponents say it could have wide-reaching impact on religious organizations. Mary Fiorito of the Ethics and Public Policy Center said the bill presents tremendous implications for Catholic healthcare.
Will Catholic hospitals, pediatricians, and clinics be required to provide cross-sex hormones for someone who requests them?
Loretta Brown is a reporter for the National Catholic Register. She says some Catholics are concerned the bill's definition of pregnancy discrimination would weaken conscience protections for healthcare workers.
There wouldn't be dissent really permitted on abortions. And that's interesting, too, because it's not as directly related to the stated intent of this legislation.
In our exclusive interview with New York Cardinal Timothy Dolan last week, he told EWTN News In Depth that the bill presents a false portrayal of equality.
So we're against it on principle because we don't want to see some of these toxic measures go through. And secondly, we're against it because we know it is going to chip away at religious freedom. We're in a country founded on the presumption that that's the first and most cherished freedom, the freedom of religion. And it's going to chip away at that.
The Equality Act specifically excludes the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, a federal law that prevents other laws from placing a substantial burden on the free exercise of religion. Fiorito says that exclusion should be cause for concern.
The concerns of religious people and religious institutions are not taken into consideration here. So it's an incredibly threatening bill. I can't overstate that.
The House of Representatives passed the Equality Act last month, with 3 Republicans joining Democrats in voting for the bill. But its passage seems unlikely in the Senate, where it would need 60 votes to avoid a filibuster. At the U.S. Capitol, I'm Kate Scanlon, EWTN News In Depth.
From a Catholic perspective, there's a lot to unpack about the Equality Act. Our roundtable discussion is next. But first, more of our papal photo album. Here's day 3 of Pope Francis's pilgrimage to Iraq. Visit to northern Iraq to pray for the victims of war. Meeting the Christian community on the Nineveh Plains in a restored church ransacked during the war. Final celebration, Mass at the sports stadium in Erbil. EWTN News In Depth takes a deeper dive into the potential repercussions of the Equality Act. Joining us for the discussion are Dr. Jacqueline Rivers, Executive Director of the Seymour Institute for Black Church and Policy Studies, Dr. Melissa Moschella, Associate Professor of Philosophy at the Catholic University of America, and once again, EWTN's Executive Editor and DC Bureau Chief, Dr. Matthew Bunson. Thank you so much for joining us. Jackie, let's talk about what this means for our understanding of the human person in American law. What does the Equality Act proliferate?
Well, I think that one of the troubling things coming out of the Bashar decision was the term sex was used in a setting which actually, it was used as a justification for the decision when in fact the whole idea of sex was being undermined, the idea of gender, that this is completely socially constructed on one hand, but on the other hand, that somebody could be born with a particular gender in which doesn't match your biological expression. So this, to me, is a continuation of this confusion around what it means to be a human being and about the essential aspects of being a human, and that is one of them being gender.
Matthew, Dr. Rivers just alluded to Bostock, this decision last year that redefined sex as sexual orientation and gender identity in Title VII. This was supposedly the catalyst for this bill, the idea that this would change. But how does the Equality Act dangerously broaden that definition?
Well, if we go back to that decision, especially the opinion by Justice Gorsuch, this was supposed to be very narrowly defined. Now, the problem there was that he was asked and had to answer the question about what are the ramifications for this, and he said, well, we'll have to deal with those questions later. Well, here we are dealing with those questions. What the Equality Act does is, as Dr. Rivers just alluded, it takes the basic concept that is still grounded, one can argue, in Bostock, of actual distinctions between men and women biologically and destroys those. It obliterates them, essentially stating that the human person is self-defined. The gender identity now is going to be everything. The problem with that, as we're seeing, as you can read in the bill itself, is that how that's applied in law is going to be destructive not only to religious liberty, it's going to be destructive to women who will no longer be safe in shelters. One of the terms that we're going to be hearing a lot of in the coming years, I fear, is public accommodation. That is allowing those who are self-described or self-defined men to be able to go into shelters. Women are simply not going to be safe. We're seeing the impact of this already on sports. And again, we have to keep coming back to the great risks this poses to religious liberty.
Those are big risks indeed, and Jackie alluded to some of that in this redefinition of the human person. Melissa, can you explain how the Equality Act then discriminates against religious institutions and individuals? Just these protections that the Supreme Court took to ensure the protections for religious institutions are in danger because of the Equality Act. Can you touch upon that a little bit?
That's right. The Equality Act will impose radical extreme gender ideology on all Americans and will do so without any kind of religious exemption. So the Equality Act has a clause that explicitly exempts itself from the Religious Freedom Restoration Act passed under President Clinton, extremely popular by a bipartisan Congress, which says that laws that burden the exercise of religion are only allowed if they're for a compelling state interest and are narrowly tailored to that interest. So the Equality Act exempts itself from that, meaning that, say a Catholic hospital objects to providing abortion. Well, according to the Equality Act, that could be pregnancy discrimination, not providing equal medical care to pregnant women, which the Act defines as an element of sex discrimination. So the Equality Act could force all Catholic hospitals to provide abortions, could force all doctors, regardless of conscientious exemptions, to provide abortions.
And these are pregnant women or pregnant people, right? It defines that it's not just women that can be pregnant.
Well, that's right. So according to the Equality Act, gender is defined by subjective beliefs or preferences about yourself completely independent of biology. So the biologically based and also biblical view that male and female are elements of one's biology determined by the role in reproduction that you are biologically organized to be able to perform, that goes out the window, and that becomes effectively an illegal form of discrimination, a form of hate speech. So any Catholic school that teaches their children that God made them male and female, well, that now becomes bigotry. That now becomes discrimination.
Jackie, let's talk about these narratives of discrimination. You've written about the important role that the Black church has to play and that the African American community has to play in this. In this Equality Act, there is a change to the definition of race and how it's treated to make it an affiliation. How would this affect, say, funding for HBUs or race-specific protections?
Well, one of the things that I just wanted to go back to was this idea that the act exempts itself from RFRA. This is a constitutional protection, the protection of religious freedom. And it's very troubling that the act would continue to undermine respect for and taking into account such an important freedom. In addition to that, it is also very troubling because it is not merely about religious freedom, it's really also about freedom of conscience. And to what extent is the right of people to act on their conscience undermined in a setting in which the Equality Act is passed? Perhaps not immediately by this act, but what does it open the door to? I think that's also important. This has implications for the Black church because we definitely are a religious group which is very conservative in terms of our understanding of the Bible, our respect for the Bible, for teaching on the issue of gender and sexuality. And this undermines our teaching. It puts us at risk. But in addition to that, it puts us in a position where if a Black faith-based organization is taken to court because it is acting in a way which is seen as contrary to this Equality Act, we have to defend ourselves. Most Black churches, Black faith-based institutions are extremely tight-strapped, where we don't have the kind of resources that it would take to defend ourselves. So I think this is very troubling for us as Black institutions.
Very troubling indeed. Matthew, other institutions that are going to be at risk, the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities cited that the Equality Act would limit student choice for middle and low-income students specifically, disproportionately impacting racial and ethnic minority groups. How is that part of the bill?
Well, we talk about real-world impact for something like the Equality Act. We've been talking in sort of philosophical terms and biological terms, but here is the real-world reality that those institutions that refuse to bend to the definition of the human person as we're seeing may be at risk of losing federal funding. 7 out of 10 students who go to CCU schools or CCCU schools receive federal aid and help. 72% of them are African Americans, for example. 72% of those students receive federal help, Pell Grants and the like. About 32% of those students who are white receive federal help. So what will this do? It will create a disproportionate damage to minority groups who receive federal aid and who are then being punished because these institutions simply refuse to go along with what the Equality Act is demanding.
This is troubling indeed. And Dr. Rivers, last question, quick question for you, just on the issue of abortion. Dr. Moschella talked about this a little bit, the issue of abortion and the way that it's being used in this bill. Why is this also troubling that we would be proliferating this in religious institutions?
Well, it's very troubling because we are committed, those of us who are conservative Christians, let me term that differently. Those who are Orthodox Christians, who are basing our position on the Bible, are committed to the protection of the most innocent human beings, unborn babies. And to the extent to which the Equality Act impacts our right to teach that abortion is wrong and to stand for the defense of unborn human life, that puts us at risk, puts our churches at risk and our faith-based institutions.
Thank you so much, all three of you, for joining us and having this important discussion. And for more from EWTN News in Depth, we invite you to connect with us on our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages to continue the conversation.
It needs a little Jesus.
From despair and anguish to trust in the Lord, we take you on one man's faith journey, coming up next. We each practice our faith in our own way, mostly sincere, quiet, somber. But reporter Mark Irons introduces us to a man who mixes in a little humor with his Jesus. Here's this week's Faith Journey in Depth.
In the world of heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, the work never stops.
You don't get summers off either, you know.
But besides quality service, Catholic Darren Stern takes faith on the job and delivers something unique to his customers.
This is cute.
It's a wind-up Jesus. Well, a lot of times I'm like, if you want this air conditioner to keep running, keep this little Jesus by it because I think it's the only thing that's going to make it work. And they're like, it's that bad? I'm like, it's that bad. Well, everybody needs a little Jesus in their life.
The thing is, once you get to know Darren Stern a little better, The truth is, he really couldn't be more serious about that.
I was having all these problems.
Darren says for the better part of 20 years, he struggled with chronic anxiety.
And I was like a perfectionist, and I didn't want to let people down.
He had energy and drive, but not knowing how to handle it, he was constantly worried and stressed.
I couldn't eat. I would just keep going because it's in my mind. It was all you could do. Just keep going, keep running.
Darren describes hitting rock bottom.
It got so bad that I was ready to give up. And I said, Jesus, you got to help me. I got to get through this. And I didn't know how to get through it. I didn't know what was going to happen. When you have nothing, then Jesus is all you have. And I was down at the end.
Darren recalls years of praying through the pain and finally giving up control.
I surrendered. I said to myself, let Jesus take all the bad stuff. I started embracing all that energy that just is stored up inside me. Stopped worrying so much about what other people thought and about all the problems. Just go out and do the best you can. And that's what I kept focusing on. You know, Jesus is right there. What can go wrong?
And he says prayer,
just talk to him and just listen,
has become a daily source of comfort.
Thank you so much. All right, you guys have a great day. Bye-bye.
Darren Stern, sharing his faith in little ways, telling his story.
You know, I still wake up with anxiety. Everybody does. You're going to have that. But now it's different.
Sharing hope.
All right, Jesus, let's go home.
Mark Irons, EWTN News In Depth.
A little bit of Jesus. We all could use some of that. And now, as we close, our images of the week. Throughout the show, we've shared our Pope photo album, highlights from Pope Francis's trip to Iraq. We've saved our favorite photos for last. The future and hope of Iraq, the children. Dressed as Pope Francis, inspiring vocations. Our gratitude to some great photojournalists for their wonderful images. And that's a wrap on this edition of EWTN News In Depth. I'm Montse Alvarado. We'll continue the conversation same time next week. See you then.